This is my Star Trek meets medicine novel. I think I'm just going to plunge into a scene very close to the beginning, in which the people on the planet are dealing with the arrival of this starship crew. "Let me see if I understand this," McIntyre said. "You saw an aircraft of unknown configuration land beside the new wind farm. When you took a party to investigate, you found no aircraft, but 4 strangers who claim not to be Keani. They're wearing uniforms with symbols that do not correspond to any Keani scheme, and they did not, in your opinion, behave as Keani, although you cannot quantify why. When one of the women was harassed, she grabbed the blade of a knife and took no injuries, at which point you decided I had to see them." Douglas Tates fixed his eyes at a point above Creon's head. "Yes, Creon. Perhaps the knife was blunt." "No," Tates said, in his deceptively slow manner. "The knife was not blunt. And the woman was not wearing any kind of handguard. She showed us her hand. She made a point of it. But they were otherwise unarmed." "Yes, Creon. And you did not find any cache demolitions materials in the vicinity?" "No, Creon." Creon snorted. "You and I both know that you're doing a dreadful job of explaining why you thought these people had to be brought straight to me. No questions asked." There were 3 people from whom Creon might have accepted the story this odd. One was almost certainly dead. One was his foster brother John, and the other was standing in front of him, sweating glass pellets. Creon didn't think the engineer was capable of untruth. It would have violated the mathematical laws of the universe, but he could not articulate intuition. Creon did, however, trust Tates' experience well enough to believe the engineer had not brought him a Keani assassination squad. "And you and I both know that once I've grilled you, lightly, for my pleasure, I will see these prisoners of yours." "Thank you, Creon. And after I've seen them, I will explain to you what I observed about them. No matter how great a man's native gifts, they are useless if he cannot communicate," which was precisely what his father had said to him on more than one occasion. By the time he had done grilling the engineer, lightly, as he had promised, he understood better why Douglas had decided as he did. The size, trajectory, ease of landing, and swift disappearance of the arriving craft. The bright streak in the dawn sky that had preceded it. The engineer knew these things for anomalies. He struggled more to describe what had unsettled him about one of the men, beside his extremely dark skin, and he struggled exceedingly to give Creon a useful description of their demeanour beyond "they did not exist." Creon desisted before the urge to bang one or the other, or both of their heads against the tiled desk became overwhelming. "Let's go down." On the main floor, Creon rolled his wheelchair across to the doorway of the main hall. The doors were massive, decorated with a scene of these foothills as they must have been when humans arrived. A man stood in the open doorway, studying it. 2 of the men from Douglas's troop flanking him. Douglas's description, Creon thought in shock, was indeed inadequate. The man had a short-barreled torso, long arms and legs, and a heavy-browed face with a broad nose and large nostrils. His dark irises almost filled the whites of his eyes. His dark skin had a grey sheen to it, except for the deep plum shade underlying his lips. He was certainly human. Equally certainly he was neither Keani nor Bakueni. "Somebody fetch John, please," Creon said. He wheeled himself into the hall. It was octagonal, with a vivid tiled floor depicting ancient legends of animal creation. Stained glass doors led to an outside greenhouse almost as large as the room. When the Bakueni took Dalibrok by force, the greenhouse had housed a collection of living butterflies. Entering it had been like being robbed by flowers. The butterflies had died that first winter, when the Bakueni had had not enough fuel to keep themselves warm, never mind butterflies. It had been one of the few times that he, aged 25 and hardened by their campaign, had wept. Inside the hall, The dark man's companions waited, surrounded by Creon soldiers. The other man was dark as well, earth brown rather than black, and normally proportioned. The older of the two women was 60 at least, and small without being brittle. Her skin was lined, and her greying hair close cropped. All four wore the same uniform, a hip-length green jacket over a pull-on shirt and grey trousers. On the breast of the jacket was an emblem of snake and staff against a barbed trefoil. The woman also wore an embroidered glove on her right hand. He made a note to himself to pay attention to that hand. The second woman. Her hair was as coppery as his own, feathering around a heart-shaped face. She, too, was small and slight, but the smile she gave him kindled something in him he had not felt for nearly 3 years, the heat of mutual sexual recognition. And immediately after came the surge of bitterness and futility. He jerked his chair forward, breaking her focus on his unmarred face. His eyes flicked over her eyes flicked over his body, seeing atrophying legs, left arm a stump, right disproportionately muscled. His shirt covered the scars on his chest and belly, but not the lines on his face, the white threads in his hair, the sickly cast to his skin. She frowned slightly, as though perplexed, but without revulsion or pity. He looked away from her. That distraction would never do. He swung his chair so that he directly faced the old woman. He had already discerned by the way they stood that she was their leader. Theodore Macrinus, he said, the name he had had from Douglas. I am Creon McIntyre. There was a hasty step behind him and an indrawn breath. Where are you from? Said John. Close the doors, please, Creon said to the nearest man. Theo studied John briefly. Myself, Sparta. Iphigenia Kyrikadis. This, the radiant little redhead. Hyaka, but her ancestors were Spartan. The redhead gave her a startled sideways glance at that. Orfeo from Guayaquil. Edward Linares from Pentha. Do you recognise the adaptations? John shook his head vaguely, and Creon felt a sudden exasperation that everyone seemed stricken dumb this morning. John, he said sharply. John blinked down at him. I have a book left behind by the Keani physicians. It was written immediately after the plague, and it described the way that humans had adapted themselves to hostile planetary environments. I was studying it for, yes, Creon said, before he could speak of the particular problem he wished to solve. He's in it, John said, with a jerk of his head towards Orfeo, and the other man from Penthe. Creon, their wrists are tied, he finished, voice rising in protest. Creon gestured, and Douglas produced wire clippers and stepped into a bay. Freed, the little redhead rubbed her wrists pointedly. Creon noted red stripes on pale skin. Sparta was colonized after Nereus, Theo said to John. Our adaptations were largely biochemical to deal with environmental toxins. Hyakans never needed to be adapted. You're a physician yourself, I gather. John Baruch, milady, he said with a dip of his head. Creon gave him a warning glance at the unconscious lapse into slave argot. John was easily overawed, readily dominated. Theo Macrinus Sparta, Theo for short. Pleased to meet you, John said. Theo said, and extended her gloved right hand. John looked to Creon for permission, and Creon, his lips tight, nodded. John took the offered hand, and his eyes widened. It's prosthetic, yes, she said, offering her handshake to Creon in turn. Creon McIntyre, he said again. The hand was hard, but her fingers closed gracefully on his with no more than normal pressure. The soldiers placed chairs to seat them in a loose arc, facing him and John. Douglas stood back behind him. Theo's eyes strayed over the tiled decorations, her lips parting with appreciation at the sight of clay-shaping gods, labouring goddesses, speaking gods. The eightfold envisioning of creation as a joyous roiling forth of beast and bird kind. Creation myths, I take it. Which is yours, Creon McIntyre? It is not here, Creon said. I am Bahueni. She smiled. I can see we have a lot to learn. Where should we begin? With your telling me who you are and why you're here. You are found close to one of our crucial installations, which our enemies look to destroy, and who are you that he should bring us to you? I command the defence of Dallybroch. Against whom? Said the redhead. He shifted his eyes to meet hers. They were very green. Against the Keani, he said calmly, not at all inclined to explain the precariousness of their situation. This was their territory. And back to Teo. The jump gate has been closed for a century and a half. The last air to spacecraft capable of leaving the atmosphere was destroyed 8 years ago. John said suddenly, during the plague, we sent a ship, a message asking for help. Didn't get through? It got through, Teo said heavily, but the plague was not confined to Nereus. As far as we know, it affected every one of the settled worlds. We have been 150 years rebuilding to the point of being able to restore contact, she said, her shoulders squaring slightly. Wyora is one of 9 ships sent out to reopen the gates and contact the colonies on the other side. We are very pleased to find you. Why? Said Creon. Our last contact was Bajat. Heavy metal toxicity killed all the descendants of the plague survivors before we arrived. To John she said, I'm sorry that no one came. There was no one able to come before now. What do you want? To examine your records, do a health and genetic survey on your entire population, and draw samples from the graves of the victims of the plague. Do you know what it was? John said. No, Teo Macrodinus said simply, we don't. Whether it was never isolated or whether the information was lost or destroyed, we don't know. There's a significant bias towards certain genotypes in survivor colonies, and we've used that to create an impression of the plague. But we have not yet isolated or identified the plague itself. Creon said, this disease destroyed civilization. Are you prepared to come on it again? As prepared as we can be. She spread her gloved hand, palm uppermost. We have the best medical training and technology the new Confederacy can supply. And unlike our colleagues of 150 years ago, we know the plague's there. That he did appreciate. Good intelligence was invaluable. And why the interest in Nereus, out of all the worlds you might visit? Only 9 ships, not many for the task in hand, which implied Nereus must have some importance to them. Nereus' unique ecology. There's a chance that bodies buried in unterraformed ground might be better preserved than others we've studied. That large island about 2,000 kilometers southwest, Iphigenia Kirikadis said, her face alight. That's the place that we want to explore first. We need to find descendants of the people buried there, if there are any remaining. There are indeed, Creon said precisely. We are they. The little redhead half rose out of her chair. You're the Adaptives?
They were once known as